There are stories from this war that seem unbelievable, not because they are exaggerated, but because they are painfully true. This is one of those stories. It starts in occupied Poland in the autumn of 1940. A man stands on the cold cobblestone street of Warsaw. His name is Witold Pilecki, a cavalry officer, husband, father of two. He adjusts the collar of his worn coat, glances at the photograph of his family that he keeps folded in his pocket, and does something almost unimaginable. He walks calmly towards a German patrol to get arrested. He is not fleeing hell, he is volunteering to enter it. Born in 1901, Witold grew up in a Poland that technically did not exist. The Russian Empire ruled the land and the Polish language was banned in schools. Even as a child, he learned that freedom was something Poles whispered about, not celebrated. At 18, he joined a cavalry unit to fight for Poland's independence. Those who served with him said he was calm, modest, and fiercely loyal. A man who smiled easily but never wasted words. By 1939, he was a husband, a father, and a painter in his free time, enjoying a quiet life in eastern Poland. Then everything changed. Germany invaded from the west, and 2 weeks later, the Soviet Union advanced from the east. Poland was torn apart. Its army scattered, its cities burned. Witold joined the underground resistance, the Armia Krajowa, or Home Army. He worked in secret, printing newspapers, organizing shelters, and gathering intelligence. But news began to spread about something darker. A camp near the town of Auschwitz. People whispered that prisoners were being worked to death. Some claimed they were completely disappearing. The camp was called Auschwitz. In Warsaw, resistance leaders needed to understand what was happening there. But to learn the truth, someone would have to go inside. It was essentially a death sentence. When they asked for a volunteer, Pilecki raised his hand. He didn't hesitate. He told no one except his superiors, not even his wife. He created a false identity, Tomasz Serafiski, and arranged to be captured during a German roundup. On the 19th of September 1940, he stepped into the street as soldiers sealed off the district. He let himself be pushed into a truck, surrounded by terrified men and boys. The truck rumbled through the night. The air was thick with fear, sweat, and disbelief. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else cursed. Pilecki said nothing. He watched, memorizing every detail. The insignia on a uniform, the direction they were headed, the smell of engine oil and straw. At dawn, the train slowed. Through the cracks in the slats, he saw barbed wire, gray barracks, and an iron gate that read, Arbeit macht frei. Work makes you free. It was a lie so complete it almost seemed to mock the sky. Inside the gates, everything changed. Guards shouted in German, dogs barked. Prisoners were beaten with rifle butts. Within minutes, Pilecki had his hair shaved off, his uniform stripped away, and a number burned into his arm, 4,859. He no longer had a name. The first thing he witnessed was death, not in grand gestures of battle, but in small, silent moments. A prisoner too weak to stand was kicked until he was motionless. A guard smoked a cigarette while another man's life ended at his feet. The smell of the camp was unforgettable, a mix of sweat, disease, and something else, metallic and sweet, that lingered in the air. He later wrote that the camp was not meant only to imprison. It aimed to erase, but even in that pit of despair, he began to organize. Quietly and carefully, he built a network men who passed information, shared scraps of food, and recorded the names of the dead. He smuggled notes on pieces of cigarette paper, hidden in clothing seams or inside loaves of bread. His first reports reached the Polish resistance by late 1941. He described starvation, executions, and the beginnings of mass gassing. Those reports made their way to London and then to Allied intelligence. Now the world knew something monstrous was happening. Yet, little was done. For Pilecki, that silence was almost unbearable. He watched new trains arrive daily, each filled with hundreds of men, women, and children. He saw them driven to the so-called showers. He witnessed the smoke that followed. He tried to hold on to his faith. At night, lying on the wooden planks of his bunk, he prayed quietly, sometimes in Latin, sometimes in whispers, barely audible. He believed that even if the world refused to see, God still did. He later wrote that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And so he acted. He organized escape attempts, built radios out of stolen parts, and drew maps of the camps. He dreamed of an uprising inside Auschwitz with prisoners, turning on guards and the outside resistance striking the fences. But the plan was never approved. Too risky, they said. Too uncertain. He stayed for nearly 3 years, 3 years of hunger, disease, and witnessing death become ordinary. In April 1943, realizing he could do no more, he decided to escape. That night, under the cover of darkness, he and 2 comrades overpowered a guard near a bakery, cut through a wire fence, and ran. They ran for hours, stumbling through mud while shouts and gunfire rang out behind them. By dawn, they were miles away, hiding in a wheat field. When they finally reached a farmhouse, the farmer initially threatened to shoot them until Pilecki spoke Polish. They were given bread, milk, and a place to sleep. For the first time in almost 3 years, he lay down without fear of a whistle or a boot. When he reached Warsaw, he reported everything: the gas chambers, the crematoria, the endless transports. He urged the resistance to push the Allies to act, to bomb the railways, to strike the camp, to do something. But his words fell into the bureaucratic fog of war. The Allies already knew much. They had other priorities. He returned to fighting. This time, in the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, he led his men through streets filled with rubble and smoke. He was wounded, captured, and escaped again. When the uprising fell and the Soviets watched from across the river without intervening, he realized Poland's suffering was far from over. When the war finally ended, Pilecki hoped for a free homeland. Instead, the Soviets established their own regime. Many of the same men who had fought against the Nazis found themselves hunted by their own government. Pilecki was ordered to gather intelligence on the new authorities, a dangerous mission he accepted. He worked quietly, sending reports on arrests, disappearances, and executions. In 1947, he was betrayed. The Polish secret police raided his apartment, seized his notes, and took him to Moko prison. They tortured him for months. They broke his ribs, his jaw, and his teeth. They demanded he renounce his past, confess to treason. He refused. At his show trial, his face was swollen and bruised, but his posture remained straight. He stood before a judge half his age and spoke calmly. He said, "I tried to live in such a way that in the hour of my death, I would feel joy, not fear." The verdict was already decided. On May 25, 1948, in a small basement cell, a single bullet ended his life. His body was buried in an unmarked grave for decades. Under communist rule, even his name was forbidden. His children grew up in silence, knowing only that their father had done something noble, and that it had cost him everything. Only after 1989, when Poland regained its freedom, was his story revealed. His reports were discovered in archives. His name was restored. The man who had walked voluntarily into Auschwitz was finally honored as a hero. But his story is not one of triumph. It is a story of conscience. A man who saw evil rising and chose to confront it, not escape from it. When I first read his words, written in the slender, trembling script of a prisoner, I thought of all the reports we sent during the war. Numbers, maps, movements. We were taught to write clearly and avoid emotion. Pilecki wrote differently. He wrote about hunger, about the sound of boots on snow, about the way men prayed without words. He wrote as someone who understood that facts alone were not enough, that truth, to resonate, had to be lived. He once said he discovered two kinds of people inside Auschwitz: those who believed nothing mattered and those who believed everything did. He chose the latter. When he had chances to escape earlier, he refused. He stayed because others could not leave. He believed knowledge, even of horror, could save lives. He was wrong about that, at least during his lifetime. However, history, in its long patience, proved him right. His reports became evidence at war crimes trials. His example inspired generations of Poles who learned that bravery does not always lead to victory. I often think of that September morning in 1940. The quiet, deliberate steps of a man walking into the unknown. He must have felt fear. But he kept walking. Maybe that is the truest measure of courage. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to keep moving when the world demands you stop. Tonight, as we remember the war's heroes, the pilots, the sailors, the soldiers who fell, spare a thought for one man who fought not with a rifle, but with a notebook, who entered the darkest place on earth to bring back the truth, and who paid for that truth with his life. Witold Pilecki's grave has never been found. Somewhere beneath the soil of Warsaw lies the man who walked into Auschwitz, returned to warn the world, and was silenced by his own. Yet perhaps his greatest monument is not stone or bronze, but memory itself, the belief that one person's conscience held firm against the tide can still matter. History often remembers those who win, but sometimes the greatest victory belongs to the one who refused to surrender his soul. And so the story of Witold Pilecki endures, not as a legend, but as proof that even in a century of madness, one man's decency could still shine like a small, steady light in the long night of war.